Well, the Fed has really painted themselves into a corner. We're now facing the situation they really wanted to avoid: persistent inflation and declining growth. Last week provided us with a good amount of evidence that paints quite the bleak picture. Building permits at 6-month lows. New home sales, they can't keep up with rising inventories. Durable goods on the decline. GDP, best described as lackluster, all along with ever sticky inflation. So while the current high interest rate environment continues to put a strain on growth, inflation is preventing the Fed from cutting rates. But most importantly, we're going to show you the last time we faced these exact conditions and what was the result. Building permits represent the first stage in the construction of a new home and therefore act as a true leading indicator to the housing market. Reported in thousands. Last week, we learned there were only 1.4 million issued, representing a significant decline from last month, and actually now at lows we haven't seen since September of last year. New home sales were also reported, and on the surface, the data looked good. 693,000 homes sold in the past month does represent an increase from the prior month, 637, but not really good news when we take into consideration the rising inventory. There are now 477,000 homes for sale, beating last month's 465,000. And in fact, the number of homes on the market continues to rise every month. Is the housing market really beginning to slow? This begs a question. After purchasing a house, what do we buy to put inside that house? The answer: durable goods. Those manufactured items meant to last at least 3 years. This includes automobiles, computers, aircrafts, but also home appliances like washing machines and refrigerators. Weakness in the housing market can also be seen through the weakness in the durable goods orders. On a year-over-year basis, the durable goods rose only 1.3%, the second lowest number in at least a year. It was widely reported that durable goods, excluding transportation, rose at an even slower rate. But the key takeaway is that there's been a continued slump in durable goods for the better part of this year, and that does reflect a lack of consumer appetite for goods that are complementary to the housing market. Is the economy still growing? Well, we have the latest data. And in just a moment, we're going to look back in time. We're going to show you the last time we saw similar conditions and what was the result. The quarterly gross domestic product was just released. For the first quarter, the U.S. economy grew at a pace of only 1.6%, which shows us a continuous decline and, in fact, the lowest reading since April of 22. Unfortunately, while economic growth continues to slow, inflation, on the other hand, remains quite resilient. The personal consumption expenditure rose at an annual rate of 2.7%, the highest in 5 months. In fact, inflation has been so stubborn, it's caused many to rethink the Fed's path. From the Commerce Department: inflation data has consistently been firmer than expected, with recent months getting revised somewhat higher in the subsequent reports. The trend has led investors and Fed officials to rethink whether rate cuts will be appropriate this year. But the market reaction is usually the most telling. Each line shows us a probability of the Fed not cutting rates during each of the next several subsequent meetings. What's really interesting is the latest combination of growth and inflation data resulted in an increase in the odds that the Fed will not cut rates. In blue, the probabilities of no interest rate cut in June, and in purple, July. Just in the past few days, the odds of no interest rate reduction in June rose from 84 to 88%, and in July, the odds increase rose from 56 to 70%. Clearly, despite the weakening growth figures, the Fed funds futures are responding to the sticky inflation data. As long as inflation remains resilient, the Fed remains far away from the prospect of a rate cut. Using history as a guide, what can we learn from the past? Consider the economy of 2007 and 8 prior to the collapse. In July of '08, the inflation rate rose to a 5.5% annual rate. At the same time, GDP fell at a rate of 2.1%. Of course, we all know what ensued shortly after. Fast forward to present day, we're certainly not at those extremes, but the trend is concerning. The current consumer price index rose to a year over year level of 3.5%, which stands in stark contrast to the faltering 1.6% GDP. This week is going to be the source of a great deal of very important data, including housing figures, construction spending, a much anticipated Fed meeting, and if that wasn't enough, we also have jobs numbers. While the economic calendar is important, there's a whole other level of analysis that deserves our attention. One such economic barometer is the reverse repo market, and it provides us with valuable insight into an often misunderstood tool of the Federal Reserve. Here we explain the very simple terms how the Fed uses the repo market to control inflation and what the market is now telling us.